As Halloween approaches every year, or any time people talk about the eccentric corners of Unitarian Universalism, I'm reminded in some way of our forebears' connection with spiritualism. Spiritualism was a movement based on the belief that departed souls can interact with the living. Spiritualists sought to make contact with the dead, usually through the assistance of a medium, a person that believed in their ability to contact spirits. Now, this wasn't unique to Unitarians or Universalists by any means. It was a huge national trend that many Unitarians and Universalists engaged with. But by 1897, spiritualism is said to have had 8 million followers in America and in Europe. Now, there's more to the philosophy than simply communing with the dead. Spiritualism was a whole school of thought where the laws of nature and God included the continuity of consciousness after death and the possibility of communicating between the living and those who have died. And the spirit world was thought to be something dynamic, where spirits could continue to evolve and learn and grow. All of this led to the idea that the spirits could provide the living with insight regarding moral and ethical issues, or maybe even insight into God. Some spoke about particular spirit guides that they relied on for guidance. All of this was fanned by new technologies of the late 1800s. If you think about it, photography as a new technology was pretty darn spooky. And it sometimes included some ability to show images of people who were not there at the time the photograph was taken. Spirit photographs included these images. There were also telegraphs of the time. For the first time, we were hearing voices from far, far away. No one knew exactly how far away. But inventors like Nicholas Tesla and Thomas Edison, tinkering with their new radios and spirit telephones, were inspired by these odd voices that they encountered. Early spiritualism also attracted some of the greatest scientific minds of the day, including Marie and Pierre Curie, biologist Alfred Russel Wallace, and the psychologist William James. All of them believed that modern scientific methods, far from standing in opposition to the spirit realm, could finally prove its existence. All of this exploring was scientific. Communicating with the dead was an empirical method of assuring immortality. And spiritualism coincided with the growing belief in the power of science to prove everything. Because it sought broader ways of understanding our natural world, Universalists became interested in the movement too. A couple of them were publishers of one of the prominent periodicals, and one former Universalist minister was the editor of the most popular spiritualist pamphlet in the 1850s. It was also part of the utopian communities. Casey mentioned a couple last week in her sermon. Harmonia was one founded by John Murray Spear. If you know your Unitarian history, that name John Murray should sound familiar. He was the founder of Universalism in America, John Murray Spear's namesake. John Murray Spear thought he could channel the deceased John Murray, the founder of Universalism in America, to provide insight. Pretty fascinating stuff. Why does all of this matter? Because it's helpful to know not just the logical, compassionate, justice-making parts of our history. It's helpful to know that history is full of some pretty out there stuff. And our forebearers were elbow deep in the trends of the day, including spiritualism. So happy Halloween, my friends. You are in better company than you might have realized. A couple of weeks ago, I was at a retreat with UU minister colleagues up in Rancho Palos Verdes. A handful of us had gone out to the movies that evening, which is our tradition. When we returned to the conference center and walked into the main meeting room, 4 or 5 people were gathered around one of those big round plastic tables. The conversation was pretty random, talking about the things that ministers talk about. And I noticed multiple tarot card decks out on the table. I'm not sure if they all belong to the same person, but at least a few of them did. And pretty quickly after that, one colleague began a reading for another. First, they had to select which deck to use. Apparently, one deck was more useful for particular questions, and the other deck gave you broader, more general information. This was definitely the most casual reading I had ever seen, at a plastic table with many side conversations that had nothing to do with what was actually happening. But eventually the question came up, is there a role for this in our ministries, in our UU congregations? And we all quickly agreed that in pastoral conversation, we would never bring up the topic to say, shall we consult the cards? But if a member of our congregations knew that we were familiar with tarot cards and asked for a reading, then sure, why not? One colleague, this one that was doing it at the retreat, said that she had done this a couple of times as auction items for her congregation. Since you're probably wondering, I do have tarot cards and I am not nearly well-versed enough to give anyone a reading, so that's not going to happen. I bring up this short encounter because I thought it was a great window into how we incorporate mystical traditions like tarot within a specifically Unitarian Universalist tradition. I think the key concept here, and what I want to invite us to today, is a spirit of yes and. We could go around constantly bursting each other's bubbles, but what kind of world would that be? If a practice or a belief brings someone comfort or meaning or joy or a sense of special mystery, well, let them have it. And maybe, if you hang around long enough, some of that magic might rub off on you too. So there are a few different aspects of tarot cards that I'm inclined to say yes and about. First, like most rituals and traditions that endure, tarot incorporates symbols and archetypes that resonate with all sorts of life experience. Some would call them universal. The cards each represent pieces of life that we have all experienced or will experience. And having those ideas arranged in front of you with care and intention offers an opportunity to reflect. It may give you an opportunity to gain some meaning from the past or chart a future. There's something in those symbols for everyone, and that's a really cool thing. The other thing that tarot cards have going for them is that they become an object of intention. Years ago, in my more eccentric days as a UU minister, I tracked down a deck that someone had used to give a reading to me that I really liked, and I had shuffled this meticulously for the prescribed number of times to make it my deck. And a very curious friend was over at my house when I was fittingly living in Laguna Beach at the time. I came back from the kitchen where I was probably getting a glass of wine, and I noticed that he was shuffling through my deck that I had just made my own. So annoying. I'd have to reinitiate my cards. At one level, it's really silly. But we humans seem to have intention and passion to spare. We get sentimental about special objects. We invest hope in lucky symbols or perhaps numbers. Hopefully, we get creeped out a little bit on Halloween. And occasionally, I think it's okay to channel some of that emotional energy, that intention, into an exercise or a ritual that just might bring a little hope or clarity to our life. Sometimes we want to believe that there's a power at work, and that is okay. There's also a certain performative element in the experience of a card reading. Ideally, there's an atmosphere set where everyone can focus on the cards and some candlelight doesn't hurt. This is something that we can critique as theatrics, but frankly, what in life is not theatrics? Every time we put on clothes to leave the house or choose what to say and what voice to say it in, we're attempting to conjure up a particular response from others. As they say, all the world's a stage. Why not create a little drama and intrigue? Why not put some intention into setting the scene when you're doing something special? Yes, it can be dramatic, and that's kind of fun. As I learned this week, the tarot cards actually have a pretty interesting history. They're rooted in Italian playing cards that date back to the 15th century in Europe. Playing cards, very similar to the ones we use today. But in the late 18th century, French occultists began to make really elaborate and completely unsubstantiated claims about where these cards came from, leading to the emergence of this customized deck for divination. Yes, tarot cards are fun, and a dose of skepticism and a look at the origins of an idea are always prudent. Believe it or not, this is not a sermon about tarot cards. This is a sermon about the many tools we have available to deepen our lives. Some of you really enjoy walking a labyrinth. I know that's Lynn Cowan's big thing. Some of you practice yoga. Perhaps you have your own rituals or lucky objects. These things are tools. Use them if they are useful, and keep them in perspective. Like all ways of knowing, a healthy dose of skepticism is necessary for keeping grounded. Spiritualism and the Halloween season also always remind me of a deep, common motivation we have to stay connected with people who have passed from our lives. A good friend of mine comes from a Jewish background. He's a committed atheist. I'm not talking about Dave, actually. But this friend of mine, like Dave, maintains his Jewish cultural identity. The only real Jewish ritual that he maintains to this day is lighting a yahrzeit candle or a soul candle. This is a special candle that you can sometimes see in the kosher section of the grocery store. It burns for 26 hours. You may remember in Judaism, like in Islam, the day begins at sunset. So the evening before the anniversary of the death of each of my friend's parents, he lights a yahrzeit candle. There's not a whole lot to it. The candle just burns in the kitchen as a reminder. For my friend, it serves as both a connection to cultural roots and a simple reminder of his parents. Like any ritual, the physical commitment of going out and buying the candle and taking the time to light it serves as a reminder and an opportunity to pause, something to do with our bodies to prepare our hearts and minds. In recent years, especially here in Southern California, the Day of the Dead has taken on major significance, and we got to learn about that in our children's story today. Like any holiday or ritual, the meanings are richly layered. There are aspects of the holiday that anyone can learn from. I love the idea of setting up a small altar with mementos to deceased loved ones. I can only guess that the bright colors and the festive atmosphere have attracted a lot of attention to Day of the Dead for folks who don't have Mexican heritage. And I'll just say, tread lightly. It's a great idea to appreciate another culture. You don't have to appropriate it and take it on yourself to learn what you can from it and watch. There's one more method of connecting with those who have passed that I want to mention. It really intrigues me because it's something that I haven't been able to do. In various ways, in many cultures, people visit graves of their loved ones or sites where their ashes were scattered. Sometimes that involves cleaning the headstone or leaving flowers or food as well, I guess. It might even be a picnic. The only really big challenge is it doesn't work if you live far away. My grandparents are buried in rural Mississippi and Fort Worth, Texas. Both fine places, but places I haven't had occasion to travel since their deaths. We have an uneasy relationship with cemeteries in the United States, but it could be a really lovely way to spend an afternoon, remembering and reflecting. Unitarian Universalism doesn't prescribe a particular method of remembering those who have passed. There is some freedom in that, but there's also a sense of confusion. One of the very common experiences when someone we love dies is a sense of confusion. What's next? What am I supposed to do now? And I regret that we don't have a prescribed process for remembering, reconnecting, or celebrating lives well lived. I have a hunch, though, that you all might have some wisdom to share with each other in that regard. What do you do? What rituals have you found helpful? It doesn't have to be earth-shattering. These things aren't earth-shattering or life-changing. It could be as simple as lighting a candle. How have you found ways to honor those who have gone before? Our longing for meaning and memory isn't something to be afraid of. With a little perspective, it's something to be embraced and explored. And there are many amazing paths for that exploration. Amen.